When considering the many names in the world of luxury watchmaking, I would say many of us would name a long list of brands that would spring to mind first. And when reciting these brands, I would say that if I had to guess, there'd be many that would most likely not say Chopard first or near the top. But this is a storied independent brand with watchmaking roots dating back to the 19th century, and I would say is one of the most underrated brands in the world of horology altogether. And although there being many watches that you could showcase that would help demonstrate this idea, today I wanted to look at the first watch that comes to mind when I think of the brand now, and that's the Alpine Eagle, a steel sports stunner from the brand that I think is probably one of the more underrated of its category. Let's jump into it. So now before we jump into this video, if you like looking at more underrated brands or just like looking at these type of luxury brands and just knowing what's out there, I would recommend looking at our 51 top luxury watch brands in the industry. It's a great jumping off point for learning a little bit more about different brands out there, also knowing the key models from those different collections from the brand, and then also getting some backstory with their history and some fun facts. Like, did you know that Omega actually was going to gift Richard Nixon a watch, and actually Omega Speedmaster, but he was unable to accept it given the political climate and whether or not that would send a message to have this luxury watch gifted to him. So it now sits in a museum in Bienne. So if you want more information like that and a lot more, check out the link in the description down below. So for this video, we're going to cover a few areas because this is the first time we're independently showcasing a Chopard on the channel. Now, first beginning with a background on the brand and the model, then we'll shift over to an overview of the watch, and then close with some final considerations and takeaways. Now, despite the brand's reputation of artisanally crafted jewelry in the modern era, Chopard was originally conceived as a watchmaker by the namesake founder Louis-Ulysse Chopard in 1860 in the Swiss Jura. Along with the majority of the Swiss industry at the time, Chopard produced primarily pocket watches before introducing a collection of primarily ladies' pieces in the early 20th century. After being family-owned for several generations, Chopard was eventually sold to the Schuffele family of Germany in the early 1960s. The Schuffele family has guided the brand to success in recent decades, in part returning to Chopard's watchmaking roots. In 1996, Chopard introduced the first of what many now know as their many in-house calibers, getting the jump on the in-house fervor that was going to sweep the industry in the coming 5 to 10 years, and really has been the name of the game for the last 10 to 15 years. Now, positioned against a collection that historically has concentrated on dressier models, Chopard released the Alpine Eagle in 2019, calling back to the brand's first sports watch known as the St. Moritz, released back in 1980. And given the timing of the St. Moritz release, it's more than fair to say that the watch, and therefore also the modern Alpine Eagle, were both heavily influenced by Giorgento designs like the Royal Oak and the Patek Philippe Nautilus, influences you can certainly see to this day with this design. However, the idea of watch companies borrowing design elements from one another is nothing new, and the Alpine Eagle possesses plenty of details and charm that combine to make the watch feel like its own thing, while also, of course, being infinitely easier to obtain compared to the icons that were just previously mentioned. Now, today we'll concentrate on the 41mm variants of the Alpine Eagle on a stainless steel bracelet with the 4 Hz movement here, but there also is a 36mm time-only model, as well as a 44mm chronograph version. Now, moving into our overview here, the star of the show with this piece for me was always going to be the integrated case and bracelet, both of which feature a high degree of finishing in keeping with this watch's luxurious price and positioning. The central case offers angular architecture with sharp facets at the sharply downswept lugs, each highlighted with small hits of polishing against the primarily vertically brushed surfaces seen elsewhere. A signed screw-down crown signed with the compass rose motif is located at 3 within the safety of polished crown guards that are intriguingly repeated as an additional architectural motif on the 9 o'clock side of the case, adding an element of symmetry along with a relatively strong nod to the Nautilus's direction. with the watch maintaining its sportier stance with 100 meters of water resistance rating in the process. Gazing toward the front of the watch, the step bezel is round, complete with polished ring around its vertically brushed front-facing surface, and 8 screws secure the case back, central case, and the bezel, with each screw head oriented to align with the dial's edges. Measuring just over 23 millimeters where it departs from the central case, the bracelet again exhibits a remarkably well-done display of finishing, with largely brushed surfaces offset by a raised polished central section and polished facets at the edge of each link. Tapering to 20 millimeters, the bracelet terminates with a well-hidden butterfly-style deploying clasp that is friction fit, opting to forego the use of buttons, but does incorporate milled components to complete its execution. The bracelet links are all able to be independently adjusted with screws on the underside, with each link measuring the width of about 50 to 60% of a typical oyster link from Rolex for comparison, essentially acting like half links in order to get a more precise fit. For a final yet notable detail, the bracelet offers some quick release function with the buttons residing on the back side of the lug side of the bracelet, and in totality this bracelet is very comfortable, it's eye-catching, and complements the rest of the design with unquestionable consistency. At 41 millimeters in diameter, the Alpine Eagle case wears well, feeling relatively flat, lying close to the wrist, a factor aided by the 9.9 millimeter overall height. The lug-to-lug of the central case comes in at a restrained 46.4 millimeters, but the first bracelet link, which does not shoot straight down, brings the overall length closer to 52.5 millimeters if you measure that lug-to-lug dimension that way. However, I think the best measurement is kind of splitting the difference here with these two, as I think that's going to give, again, the most accurate measurement of wear. Taking into account the real estate being occupied by the sculpted aspects of the case sides and the broader bezel, the dial seems relatively small for the diameter, helping the watch optically appear more like a 40 millimeter case when on wrist. When it comes to the dials of the Alpine Eagle, you do have some options, with the blue dials seeming to get the most attention. However, this gray or slate color here is probably my personal favorite in its ability to seamlessly transition from the dial to the surrounding steel elements. The Alpine Eagle comes equipped with a flat sapphire crystal with impressively effective anti-reflective treatment, allowing the dial to demonstrate its fine details at every angle, never falling victim to glare in the process. As you inspect this dial closely, the obvious attribute that calls for the most attention is the eye-catching textured sunray dial finish. Executed in what almost looks like a precious stone, the dial feels uniquely three-dimensional while also allowing the swirling pattern to come to the forefront. Even in the more subdued gray variant, the right lighting conditions reveal a host of other colors, including subtle browns and golden tones that are designed to evoke the shimmer of the iris of an eagle's eye. At the outskirts, a simple rehaut is printed in white to denote the minutes, with the larger square plots at the 5-minute positions. The hour markers are reminiscent of the original San Moritz, with prominent applied Roman numeral indices at 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock, with simpler rectangular indices elsewhere. Time telling is managed with the set of neatly finished baton-style hands, and a date window is tucked into, at times, the polarizing position at 4:30 and equipped with a color-matched date wheel. The hour markers and hands contain luminescent material, which works surprisingly well for a watch with more refined presentation, but don't expect the world here. Dial text is also low-key, as you can expect from a watch with this level of luxury positioning, with only the brand's word mark and chronometer printed in white at 12. But in totality, I think it's a clean and especially striking dial concept that works well, pairing the refinement of the Roman numerals with a sporty helping of luminescent material and strong legibility. Now, turning the watch over, we have an in-house caliber from Chopard, visible beneath a sapphire exhibition caseback. In 1993, Chopard acquired a movement manufacturer and set to really work on designing its own movements, with the brand introducing its first modern in-house caliber with the microrotor LUC 1.96 in 1996, conveniently. This 01.01C caliber featured in this 41mm Alpine Eagle is a bit more mass market in its concept and especially in its execution compared to some of the other LUC calibers. However, for the price of being less than $14,000, this still is an attractive looking caliber. There is some englazed linear brushing across the central bridges, polished screwed heads, and an engraved sign rotor centrally fixed, and perlage finishing on the base plate. Beating at the Swiss standard of 4 Hz or 28,800 vibrations per hour, this Chopard caliber offers a power reserve of 60 hours and is COSC certified as a chronometer, which is also nice to see. With this example demonstrating timekeeping well within the parameters, we tested it at 5 different positions, running at 0 to +2 seconds a day stay at those 5 positions. In terms of the general specifications here, you're looking at 28,800 vibrations per hour, 4 Hertz. It does feature hacking and hand winding, hacking stopping the second hand when you pull the crown to the farthest position, and again, power reserve of 60 hours. So now to unpack looking at the Alpine Eagle here and just Chopard in general, I wanted to look at this watch just because I do think it's overlooked and doesn't get talked about as much as I think it should. And just the brand in general doesn't get talked about as much as it should. And when handling this piece for the first time, I was impressed. The finishing on the case, it's absolutely there. The dial is spectacular where they were able to combine this texture with this double AR coating. I just remember my first impression was, this is really nice. Now let's just talk about some general just cons and pros here. Let's start with kind of more like the general negatives and things that I just noticed. I think the first thing for me was just given the amount of attention to detail with some of their LUC movements and how with some of their micro rotors and just attention to detail with their Fourier movements, Chopard honestly produces some of the more beautiful movements for the price range. I would say when you're talking about that high horology tier of watchmaking, I think you can, when looking at the open market, see some really good value in what they're offering up. Not to say that this is a bad movement, I would just say it does fall behind probably their standard, and it would be really cool to see like a micro rotor in here or some of their fine details that allow them to be so elevated and well positioned in the world of movement construction. But again, it's certainly not a bad movement, just maybe not to the same degree that we might expect from the brand. Now, another point that I'll mention, the clasp, I think the friction fit could have been a little bit more premium in terms of its execution, but still not a big thing there. And then I think the obvious thing to also mention is you see a lot of different watches in this. Now, I do think it comes out at the other side as its own idea. Like, I do think if you see this on somebody's wrist, I can say like, hey, that's an Alpine Eagle. But you know, with the protrusion at 9 o'clock looking like a Nautilus, you see the screws here, maybe gets in some Royal Oak. You also have like the central case that might resemble that of some 222 or original Oversea type of models, maybe earlier generation Oversea models. I see a little bit of that. So it's kind of a combination of many different things. So that's, I think, the number one aspect of this that I think people are going to be quick to bring up. But let's talk about the realities of this watch. And for $13,000, which is a lot of money, I do think though, when you're comparing this watch, we're mentioning things like the Royal Oak, the Overseas, we're mentioning the Nautilus as some of the alternatives to this. And with the trading prices of those watches and seeing something like an underrated gem like this, is it worth multiples of the price to get into one of those watches compared to something like this? Do you see a crazy jump? I would say from a finishing of the case perspective, it is very much on par with those watches. No question about it. I think the bracelet has this very slim, kind of tapered feel to it. The bracelet's not as substantial. This watch has almost a refinement to it. I would say it's more Nautilus than it is Overseas and Royal Oak, which I would say do have more presence to them. The Nautilus certainly is a heavier watch, but there's something about the bracelet and how it's more tapered and thin compared to those others that I think this kind of falls more in that lane. Also, when you're talking about the finish of the dial, I think this is an absolutely spectacular dial. I love what they did with this spiral textured type of finish to it. It really does pop at that combination when looking at the coating treatment that they've had put on the sapphire crystal. But one thing I also really like about this watch is just simply that it follows a theme that I also enjoy on this channel, which is whenever you can find that sleeper pick, when you can walk around and have something cool that is well finished, well positioned, and then ultimately you just don't see out in the wild where somebody might say, hey, what's that? And not walk into the same person that is wearing the same watch over and over again. That is not as much a concern with the Alpine Eagle. And I think that is the sweet spot of this. This is an underrated brand when it comes to the world of watchmaking, and one that probably deserves more respect. Whether or not the Alpine Eagle is for you or not, I think it is just one of those watches that's pretty cool, and I think also demonstrates why Chopard is a pretty special brand. But all right, guys, that is my take on the Alpine Eagle. What is just your take on this watch? Do you like it? Do you not like it? What do you think of Chopard as a brand as well? Do you think they're underrated? Do you think that they deserve more respect? Just love to see comments down below, because I know this is a brand that not everybody talks about, but I think people that do like them, I think have some appreciation for what they actually are putting forth from a watchmaking perspective. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. That really would help out the channel. Definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of over 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.